Welcome to East West Hurricane. I'm very happy to have today Ali Samir Oosman. Ali is originally from Pakistan, but has lived, worked, and studied both in the US and the UK. And now he's based in Dubai, leading strategic partnerships and deal flow at Microsoft for startups across the Middle East. Now, before I get into things, explaining a little bit about Ali, he is a digital strategy evangelist who's worked across both social development and private sectors. He's been in venture capital, impact investing, healthcare, education, insurance, media, digital mapping. He's done a lot. And Ollie's also really passionate about the startup ecosystem. So he's worked with startup incubators, accelerators, co-working spaces, and also a range of investors across the world, really, from Pakistan to Singapore to the US, and does a lot of that right now. And his unique experience is working both in developed markets and emerging markets. So whether it comes to social businesses, private sector, venture capital, startups. He's been an advisor, a founder. He's done a lot of different things. And I'm really happy to bring him here today to give you his perspective on the East and West. So thank you, Ali, for being here today.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much for having me. Always great to connect.
Likewise. I'd love to hear, hope they did you justice with that intro. I mean, I could say so many more things, but maybe you could start off by telling us.
You made my experience sound way better than it is.
Well, that's my goal. But I know that you've done some amazing things, and really happy to have you here. So could you maybe, in your own words, describe a little about your background, make sure I've got that right, and your experience, what you're doing right now?
Yeah, sure. So it's been an interesting journey. We met in the US many years ago. I kind of wanted to work in the US after graduating college and having studied in Middle America was a unique experience. I mean, I tell most people I meet that until then I really knew about East or West Coast living. And seeing Middle America really made me understand why America is what it is, despite a lot of things I'd heard, to be honest, people were very friendly. They were super welcoming, very eager to learn about what happens in Asia, South Asia, or do I take a camel to school? This is an interesting question I used to get. But they were, for the most part, it was a great experience, and I wanted to work there. I spent about a year and a half, post graduation, trying to, pick up roles in a big city. So I tried to get, moved everywhere from Chicago to Boston to New York, and I kind of did the sofa surfing for a bit, living with friends who were super kind and. It's a very unique experience. And then, unfortunately, as things happen, it was the last recession. 28 to 2012 wasn't a good period. Getting a visa sponsorship was hard to come by. It was expensive. There were a lot of justifications that companies had to provide, and I think the year I was there I could work for 1 year after graduation, but getting sponsorship was tough. And I remember reading about how the quota for visas that year had pretty much, majority of it had remained unfulfilled. And, so I was trying, but it was unique because I found myself eventually in New York working for an ethnic communications company for a bit. And that was cool simply because we were working with large financial sector clients like insurance companies and MoneyGram, for example, which was a payments company, on targeting ethnic communities across the US. Right? And that was kind of my first kind of exploration into different cultures and communities and how to kind of approach them from a business sense. How do you get products in the community? What do they do? Is it the community center? Is it the mosque? Is it national days that they congregate around? So that was a cool experience, right? It was everything from the Iranians or Persians in California to the community of Africans, immigrants living in Queens, New York. It was, the Hispanics in Texas and the Arab communities in Michigan. And how do you really understand those communities and get it? So it's a really cool experience. And I kind of came from I studied economics management and philosophy in college, right? So it was a combination of philosophy and economics management that kind of always gravitated me towards the strategic side of things. But my visa ended and I had to leave the US, and I have, being a British national and dual Pakistani British national. I said, hey, let's check out the UK. So I ended up there, and same issues, recession, but this time I had no knowledge of the UK. I'd never lived in the UK, and made me realize certain things that I didn't. Right? I mean, life isn't just about being able to work somewhere. It's about actually having experience and knowledge to make the most of it. And a lot of jobs that I would get to at the final stage would end up telling me, you know what, you're a great candidate, but the reality is the next candidate is local.
Yeah.
They know the lingo, they know the streets, they know the places, you don't. And literally that's why you're going to lose out every time. And I got lucky at that time to, I bumped into the CEO of a non-profit that was being set up. It was seeded with $100 million. I bumped into the CEO over a dinner after a few glasses of wine. We ended up having great conversation, and one thing led to another. And he said, hey, if you come back to Pakistan and you move there, which is where I grew up, my family was there. So she said, I want you to come and work with us and help us build this organization. And at the time it was appealing because somewhere in the back of my mind, Pakistan being a developing country, I wanted to give back in a sense. And it kind of had this sense of purpose around it. And
Yeah.
the organization was focused on food security, healthcare, and education as verticals that they would set up large businesses in. And then I realized, I said, at the end of the day, when am I ever going to have an opportunity to work directly with a CEO that controls $100 million to spend and build businesses, right? And those businesses will impact the common man with a view to hand over to the government at some point to scale up those solutions. And you'd be, no matter where I was in the world, it would be very hard to get so close to $100 million, right? So I took the leap of faith, and I moved to Pakistan, and I spent the last, I spent seven and a half years there. And I learned a lot, right? I learned a lot because I saw evolution in a way I'd never seen it before from a business and economy standpoint. I got very involved with building these businesses in education and large vocational institutions, and working with government and private sector, and building the first kind of helping work on the first, emergency ambulance service with the defibrillator and kind of all the devices and medicine on board, a doctor on board, a paramedic on board. There were no paramedics in the country. We created a paramedic facility
Really?
on our own for training. And, so that's a crazy experience, and we were driving real impact and trying to measure it and seeing what worked and what didn't work, which, ended up bringing Teach for All to Pakistan for the education vertical. It ended up bringing Junior Achievement Worldwide to Pakistan for the entrepreneurship element. And it was really, really kind of fulfilling job, I'd say, because like I said, there was a sense of purpose. You were giving back to those who needed it the most and trying to help build a community and a nation, right? And but there were a lot of truths you realize, right? You learn a lot. You learn how to spend $100 million and how not to spend $100 million. You learn how difficult public sector navigation can be, how difficult it is to change policy, no matter, you can have contacts with the minister's office, but it's still a very convoluted, long-term, drawn-out process, which doesn't necessarily, give you the desired outcome, even if you put all the research down and you do all the hard work. And eventually, I kind of moved to the private sector, working on digital transformation, and got very involved with the early ecosystem, built some startups, helped some friends launch, like the first food delivery company in Pakistan, like a Just Eat, which is what I used to use in the UK. And, a digital magazine for Pakistan that I got very involved with. And this was all at a time where the country still hadn't unlocked the power of 3G, 4G data, right? And not everybody had data on their phones and could browse the internet. It was mostly broadband, and that too limited penetration. But it was a crazy learning, right? Because you saw how when 3G launched, you saw this rapid adoption of the middle class with mobile phone penetration going through the roof, and really unlocking that opportunity as a platform that you could build services on or for to tap into the masses. And you see that now it's come leaps and bounds, right? You've seen investment come into the country. You've seen VC. I was fortunate enough to set up a corporate venture capital for a group of companies I worked with and lead their group strategy and focus on technology transformation in a lot of industries that, that had never seen it before, right? Like insurance, and how to use data for insurance, and how to use a mobile platform, and how to use an application for the consumer journey, and having to work on a lot of these things in a market that had never seen them, was truly challenging, but eye-opening, right? Because you realize so many things that are part of the natural evolution of digital economies. And you've lived in the West and you've worked in the West, so you kind of see how it's different, right? How, everything in America is digitized to an extent. Data is available freely. You need to innovate to grow, right? But in a country like Pakistan and a lot of emerging markets, you need to first document to digitize. Yeah. And you already find growth because you're just documenting activity that's never been documented before. So you don't need to innovate to grow. You just need to document to grow. And then innovation kind of comes later, and you kind of realize all of these things. So it's been a crazy journey, and I ended up moving out to the Middle East for a broader role, and joined Microsoft, specifically focusing on the startup narrative and strategy for Microsoft in the region, where we look to work with the ecosystem and bring Microsoft for Startups global program to the region, and enterprise startups in the Middle East, which includes Pakistan and Turkey and a bunch of other countries, starting with the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and 10 other countries in between, and kind of just bringing this global tech behemoth, right, to the ecosystem, where we want to work together with VCs and investors and incubators and startup enablers, whether it's government programs or private sector accelerators or whatever it may be, to really harness the power of what Microsoft brings as a technology platform, technology solutions that could integrate with startups and provide scale opportunities, but also the network, right? The network of partners and the network of customers that can really help drive growth for the startup ecosystem, I guess, holistically.
That's great. I mean, like,
so that's kind of my story.
I love that story, like, because I think your story captures so many of the trends that we see from people that fit into this sort of like East-West life. Like one being, some people underestimate as being someone from Pakistan or a lot of other Asian countries. If you go to school in the US, the visa challenge is a real challenge. Most people just assume like that isn't that big of a deal, but it affects your life as it affected mine, as it affected yours. The second thing is that I love how you're also driven, at least in part, by service to Pakistan, in the sense that you wanted to contribute to the country. And you saw that, like the article I wrote about most recently, that there are a lot of people now versus, let's say, 20 years ago, who feel like there's an opportunity for themselves to contribute to make Pakistan a better place, or to make China a better place. He's like the whole sort of like sea turtle concept. And the third thing is that I'm sure you've seen so much like growth at such a rapid rate over the last 7 years, like 7 years in the last 7 years in Pakistan, a lot of crazy things have happened, a lot of growth's happened versus 7 years in a more developed country. And I remember, I thank you specifically for being the person that really opened my eyes to Pakistan from like a business opportunity perspective, a growth perspective, potential. You're the person that convinced me to come to Pakistan in 2018. 2017 is 2018. Met so many startups through you. Was it 2017? December 2017.
2017, first trip, December 2017.
And like, I like to think I'm an open-minded person, but I still had some of these preconceived notions about like, oh, is it a good idea for me to Pakistan? But now, I love Pakistan. I think there's so much opportunity there. And there's so much excitement that I've personally seen, having been to Pakistan now 3 times, also across, not just Karachi, but also going to Lahore, Islamabad. So I guess it brings me to the first question here, where out of what's happening in Pakistan right now, maybe we could expand this to just the Middle East or more broadly in the region. What do you think are some of the most like exciting trends you're seeing today?
So I would kind of break that down slightly differently. So I'd look at Pakistan maybe with a specific focus because you asked it, and I have spent some time there, and then maybe the broader region separately, right? So just to touch upon what you said, right, the sea turtle concept. It's an inherent belief in me, at least, that developing nations lose a lot of their talent, sort of brain drain.
Exactly.
But it's not really a brain drain, right? I mean, there's 2 ways to look at it. A lot of people say brain drain, but really it's increased capacity of the brain, because if you don't leave, then you don't get exposure. If you don't get
Yeah.
exposure, you don't swell that brain with more knowledge and more ideas and more opportunity, right? So you know, what's better, what's worse? I mean, for me, it's always better to go and to grow,
Yeah.
right? But inherently, do you believe in the concept that if you aren't going to contribute in some way, then there will be no growth looking backwards, right? And at what you left. And it's, if you have the opportunity, luxury, privilege, whatever you want to call it, to go and gain that knowledge and to go gain that experience and to go learn about those things, for me, it's if you're fortunate for that, and there's many that are unfortunate not to have been able to do that, it doesn't mean that they're stupid or they don't know. They just haven't had the exposure, right? And and for me, it's a sense of responsibility that in any way you can, if you are truly, you know, caring about your community and where you come from and you have a sense of belonging, then you need to give back in a way.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily, you know, some people give back and never go back to their countries, but they give back by having made tons of money in the West and investing in sponsoring education for people to come out and get that exposure, to building schools and universities with the level of education or exposure that they had out in the West, right? So it's not necessarily always monetary. Sometimes it could be monetary, thought leadership, just engaging back with the community and seeing how you can just, there's a lot of people I've spoken to that haven't moved back from the US to Pakistan in 30 years, right?
Yeah.
Some of them haven't visited, but they reach out when they know that there's someone who's back there trying to do something in the VC space, and they're saying, how can we help? How can we get involved? How can we engage with investors and bring investments to those startups to help them grow? Can we help them move to the US and set up an office? And that active engagement is all it really takes to give back, right? So I just want to touch upon that. As far as the most exciting trends in Pakistan and the region, so for me, at least as far as Pakistan is concerned, the most exciting trend is digitization. And I'm going to say that and digitization in the broad sense, right? Why? Because just like a lot of other emerging economies in and around the region and beyond, they're still developing. You know, there's banks in this world, and this blows people's minds, right? But there's banks in this world that give millions of dollars worth of auto loans and don't have a CRM. You know, like if you don't have a CRM, you possibly can't have analytics or assessment on customer behavior or lifetime value, wallet sizing. You can't make your sales funnel more efficient. You can't do any of those things that tools enable us to do today, right? But it's a reality. And that's because on a whole, regulation needs to evolve, policy needs to evolve, accessibility and affordability for solutions need to be there, right? If you can't afford a solution, if you can't spend $1 million on a system, then you need to be able to do something cheaper. But does policy at the regulatory level allow you to use a cheaper solution which may not be locally hosted and is only cheap because it's on a foreign cloud? You know, there's a lot of nuances to driving digitization. But I think as far as for me, the trend is things are digitizing. And when you look at economic growth and economic stability, you know, when it comes to nations like Pakistan and similar, where a lot of the economy is undocumented, you find growth in just documenting it, right? And digitization allows that, right?
Yeah.
Having transactions recorded through a platform, whether it's an e-commerce transaction or a mobile wallet or any sort of economic activity that's being recorded, is then generating an economic impact, right? And that increase in economic activity will naturally benefit the macro condition or the economic situation of the country. So for me, the most exciting trend is digitalization across the board, across different industries. And then you're seeing startups create solutions in the healthcare space, in the fintech space, in the ad tech space, in the agri-tech space, in the ed tech space, which is documenting a lot of this, right? And it's bringing people on board onto platforms and moving forward. So I think for me, broad trend, digitization, I think it can drive a lot of positive change. I think it can have a lot of positive impact. And I haven't even touched upon the job opportunities that could create for the economy and a young population, right? And similarly for the region. In the region, we're seeing the same thing, right? That digitization is taking hold and governments are sponsoring, and certain countries, the UAE is great. It's a great platform. It's got infrastructure. It's got VCs that they've incentivized VCs from regulatory perspectives to set up shop here
Mm.
and look at the region from an investment point of view and make the UAE like a hub for the region when it comes to startup and venture activity, right? That's great. And the government's doing a lot. Similarly, you're seeing that in Saudi Arabia as well.
Yeah.
Turkey is a few years before everybody else, but it's still not as rich a nation as the others, and therefore cannot provide it at that level, right? So the most exciting trend across the board is just this kind of interest in innovation and this interest in digitization and how everybody's gravitating towards it, right? Even corporates today are saying, how do we get into the innovation space? How do we engage with startups? Because we've realized that innovation is not going to come the same way from our own IT departments. We've tried it for years. It's not worked because the ethos is not there, right? It's not pure innovation when it's governed by those regulations. And it needs to come from outside, and from outside in, maybe it could help us shape regulation, right? Because you're truly innovating. And that's the exciting, for me, that's the exciting trend, right? So innovation and digitization and how it's accepted today, right? Even from a cultural perspective, there was a time where parents wouldn't be comfortable with their children going into this kind of space or being entrepreneurs because it was so risky, right? They say, get a bank job, be a doctor, be a lawyer, right? Be a professional. Yeah. But now that's changed, and it's changing rapidly, right? Parents are proud of their children. They're getting exposure on platforms. They're building solutions. They're talking about building solutions, creating impact, creating change. That's exciting.
I think what's interesting to me too is how macro this is, right? Like your answer wasn't, oh, what's really cool is like social media or fintech. It's like the sort of macro level shift that's happening, not just in Pakistan, but like a cultural shift around the entire region. And the size of that is massive. I think people tend to forget that Pakistan's like the seventh biggest country in the world by population, but one of the fastest growing countries in the world when it comes to emerging markets, both from an economic perspective and also from a population perspective. And the Middle East, obviously, is one of the richest regions in the world. Now, the next thing I'm going to ask, something that might maybe affect the rate of this change in innovation is, as we all know, the coronavirus is affecting everything. So I'd love to know from your company, your jobs perspective, and also maybe just the region, and more broadly speaking about, I guess, startups, VC, how has that been affecting you at Microsoft, but also more broadly, what do you think the short-term and medium and long-term effects of that will be?
So the coronavirus is it's an evil that's haunting everybody, right? And history repeats itself, right? There's enough data. This has happened before. It's probably worse today also from a perception perspective because there's more information. There's easy exchange of information. People can share numbers and statistics, and you couldn't really do that 100 years ago, right? So that also kind of fuels the kind of the stress levels that everyone's going through and the risk levels of corona. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trivializing corona. I've been at home for 8 months.
Yeah,
right.
I know. Yeah.
It's like I take corona very seriously, but what a lot of this interconnectivity and digitization has done is it's blown up corona for the hardliners to say take it seriously, and people are really lax about it, say, oh, it's just a flu. And you have these kind of polar views that are constantly fighting each other, and in the middle you've got the data and the numbers and statistics, right? And people are swapping sides and people are sticking to their side, and that's in a way affected the business environment as well, right? You've seen a lot of change as a result of corona, but some of it has been good change. Some of it has been bad change, right? What's bad change? A lot of businesses have seen tremendous losses, right? Like you're seeing businesses that have been there for decades, that have thrived for decades, struggling to stay open, and they may shut down, right? That's not good. Nobody enjoys that. People lose their jobs. People lose their livelihoods. It's affected everybody. And by everybody, I mean there isn't a business today that isn't suffering in one way or shape or form from corona. But it's also created opportunities in its own way, right? You have, I've seen at least on the VC side, a tightening, a little bit of tightening on the approach, right? Where all of a sudden there was this overvaluation, and pre-corona you saw this WeWork model crash in its valuation of this hyperscale and this spend and burn to grow model that was overhyped, it was overvaluated, and you saw that in the last couple of years, right? It had reached its peak, and now it's rationalized a lot, right? All of a sudden, most VCs I'm talking to are saying, we want sustainable business models. We want, if you have a burn model, that's great, but what's your path to profitability?
Yeah.
And how are you going to get there? Show it to us. And this cash burn to acquire customer base just isn't the go-to anymore. And it's happened very quickly because coronavirus risk brought that change about very quickly, right? You've seen, so I think that's a positive.
Yeah.
Right? It's
Raises the bar.
It raises the bar. It values equity much more than it did as just free cash or monopoly money a couple of years ago, right? And that's good. That's a good thing. You start seeing, at least on the healthcare side, you've seen a seriousness to innovate. You've seen true innovation that would not have been approved by the FDA, for example, previously, approved under emergency guidelines because it could impact and save lives of people. Yeah. Right. And before, it could have taken a startup many years and lots of funding required to be able to get such approvals. But now you manage to get into under emergency situations because you can create that value. You can save lives. You can have impact, whether it's data sharing or, non-invasive ventilators as an innovation. It's allowed that innovation to get into mass consumer much faster than it would have otherwise. At least in the healthcare space, you're seeing that, right? It's really accelerated that as an opportunity. At the same time, we're seeing a shift in culture, right? Just work culture. I've seen and worked with and spoken to at boards and meetings with a lot of CEOs and company owners in the region that would always talk about digitization and talk about things like, remote work and work from home without ever simply putting in a VPN network system that you could sign into and work from home. Never did that. Always talked about it because it was a cool thing to do and technology is great and we want to be modern. Never really executed on it, right? And now they were forced to execute on it. And if you're looking at the data, so if you're using a Microsoft Teams and you're using systems provided by some large tech companies that can give you utilization data, right? They can tell you how many employees are using this and what hours of the day are they signed in and how many emails do they send and how much time are they spending on calls with each other and stuff like that. You can get this data as an employer, right? Today, employers who were forced to take that work from home stance because they had no choice. They had to keep the business running and keep the employees engaged. And employees, for fear of economic downturn, took it seriously as well, right? They didn't try and take advantage of the system because they knew that things are tight and job cuts will come and they don't want to be cut. So they would spend their time and they would actually get to work from home and not try and cheat the system. And when you had this kind of both of these things coming together because of the situation created by Corona, the outcomes you're seeing today is lots of companies taking a full shift on its approach to work from home, right? Why? Because what they've seen in the data is people are working more. I seeing it from my own work, right? I'm working way more as a work from home, and the hours I spend and the calls I do and the emails I have, and it's my productivity in terms of input and output has increased easily 25-30%. Yeah. And you're seeing the similar numbers, 15%, 20%, 25%, 35%, across the board in different companies and different industries, which is convincing boards and convincing owners that, hey, this isn't a bad thing. Yeah. Employees get what they want. They get to stay at home, be with their kids, manage their life at home better, pick up the kid from school when you need to without having to worry about what you're going to say to the boss and still be on call, right? But the productivity levels are going up, which works for us because the output's better. Yeah. Right? And that fundamental mindset shift and the acceleration of it has happened because of Corona. It wouldn't have happened had we not had the coronavirus affect us the way it did, right?
Yeah.
So there've been a lot of negatives, but there've been a lot of positives, which I think will change the world for the better in a lot of ways, right? I think one thing that we realized is, you know, and maybe I inherited this from my grandmother. So, you know, I was anyway a little, you know, OCD is probably the right word about shaking hands with random people and stuff like that. But it's brought that to the forefront when it comes to the masses, right? People are like, let's elbow it, you know, or let's just do a namaste to each other, right? And that's that people, and I'm talking about, like, you're talking about world leaders meeting each other like this, you know. It's not going to become so the world's going to change, and it has changed, but I think for the better, because, you know, innovation is accelerated, and approach to work has changed, and approach to community living has changed, right? How we interact with one another as just human beings has changed, and in that change we will see a lot more change in the future, right? I mean, there's lots of theories going out there, but, you know, now we're seeing proper online communities, right? Before it was platforms for social topics. Now you're seeing, like, this could build the birth of, you know, virtual communities that we've never seen before when it comes to work, productivity, and really interaction. It could speed up the adoption of crypto in a way that all cryptocurrencies have been hoping, right? Because of that digital community coming together. So there's a lot of good that could come out of this, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, like, chaotic slash part positive, part negative, like, mess of the world that we're living in right now. And I know that particularly with what's happening in Pakistan, the Middle East, you have like a unique perspective on the differences and also the similarities of what's happening in the rest of the world. And to me, like, for my next question, whether it's with regards to tech or culture, in the backdrop of the fact that a place like Pakistan or the Middle East, more broadly speaking, you know, you were mentioning how kids at our college would ask you, "Oh, Ali, did you ride to school in a camel?" and things like that. But that understanding, or maybe perhaps misunderstanding about what Pakistan is, what the Middle East is, I'd love to know from your perspective, for people outside of the region, what's something they misinterpret or misunderstand about the region itself? The region meaning Pakistan, or more broadly speaking.
So I would answer that by saying a standardization of a view, right? So if you look at the US, right? So let's not look at the US. Let's look at it as North America, right? North America, because you got the US and Canada, right? So let's say North America. And then you look at Europe, China, India, and then let's take Southeast Asia as one block, right? Just for argument's sake. Mm-hmm. Each of these kind of regions, so to speak, as come together to make a very sizable population, right? And this sizable population is where you find value in product development and in a lot of other things, right? Now, the one thing that I think is a misunderstanding about the region that we live in is, and I'm isolating India from this, right? Because India, I feel, as far as digitization is concerned and culture is concerned, has had a very good alignment with the US markets. They've managed to do BPO outsourcing of technical resource and really bridge that gap and work. And a lot of Indians support and are now CEOs of some of the largest companies in the world, right?
For sure.
Because of that
more of like a historical cultural connection.
No, and it's decades of kind of supplying labor and getting into the IT field and working closely to be the back office for large companies globally. And so it's a huge market. It's 1 billion plus people, right? Similar to China. It's huge. So, but if you look at Pakistan, everything to Turkey and Egypt, right? Then that, from a population size, makes up the same block as an India or a China or Europe or North America, right? But what's the difference? China. One country, one government, one policy, one currency. Europe. One currency. Might not be one country, but one currency and one EU policy, data policy, GDPR across Europe, right? North America. American English speakers. Mostly it's like just two countries, but the land mass and the population size covers a huge number of individuals coming under one policy, one regulation, one government, one currency, right? And if you look at that, it makes sense. But if you're based in any of these places and you look at the rest of the world, or you look at this region, for example, you can be mistaken to think we should have one strategy for the region. And that's what I think is a misunderstanding, right? You can't have one strategy for the region because everybody in the region is so different and at such different levels of their own evolution that having one strategy will not work, right? So for example, you have Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt. Huge populations, young populations, want to do better, want more for themselves, very technically skilled. So you have a lot of tech talent sitting there, building things, creating things, right? They can't sell locally because the economy isn't. If so, you don't have enterprise customers, so you can't sell enterprise tech, even if you can build it. But it's hard to sell sitting there to the US client because the US client has his own vendors that he's dealing with, and you need to get exposure is not easy, right? So you have huge tech talent and tech base. What do you not have? You don't have the access to capital. You don't have the policy regulations that will evolve but haven't evolved yet, right? And as a result, you have currency risk, you have economic risk, you have political risk, and which is why the foreign large economies like the US, the UK, and their investors don't really want to put in droves of money there because they see some instability and they see the risk, right? So they see the opportunity, but they see the risk. You look at the Middle Eastern countries, which are much richer, they have amazing infrastructure that's provided by the government policies, progressive policies. Their policies are in place to attract investment and make this a hub and make it a base and give you office space that's subsidized and set up your company here and service the region. What do they not have? They don't have the population size. So they don't have a market. So if you're a startup and you want to see the multiple valuations that you see Indian companies have or Chinese companies have or US companies have or European companies have, the reality is you're going to have to service the region, right? But even as a startup, just like as a large company out of the West, the misunderstanding is the region isn't as simple as I need to build for the region. The region has multiple different currencies, different central banks. Some currencies are pegged to the US dollar. Some are not pegged to the US dollar. Where would you lose on foreign exchange and where would you gain on foreign exchange? How should you structure that? Where should your holdco be? How can your operating company, can someone even own an operating company as a foreign entity? Does that policy even exist in a particular market in the region, right? Language barrier, right? So the masses in Pakistan speak Urdu. Has Urdu been optimized for design, UI, UX? I don't think so. Are people trying to work on that bit by bit? Yeah, in their own way. But Urdu as a language only has a handful of fonts that are digital and now they need to be optimized for design. And only then will someone who's from the masses and a youth from the middle class feel comfortable exploring and navigating an app which will really give you the user testing that you want from a product that you develop, right? You may get a download if it's in English, but you may not get that engagement because you're not comfortable navigating it in English, right? These are problems that will exist in Turkey, and these are problems that will exist in Arab-speaking countries. And each of them have different languages and different dialects. And so as a region, it's one huge opportunity. But how you tackle that as a region needs to have like micro strategies. And I think that's many a time that's the misunderstanding. That when you're outside looking in, you think one Middle East strategy would work or one South Asia and Middle East strategy would work, when really you need to really understand where each of those nations are in their evolution, where those gaps are, and then how best to plug those gaps with your impact that you can create to take the most advantage of those opportunities, right? And that's why I said, and that misunderstanding leads to a lot of people disregarding the regional opportunities, because some countries may have better opportunities than others. And there could be huge multiples that you see over a 7 to 10 year, right? But you just need to go a little deeper to really understand where they are in their evolution and where they could end up and how you can support that growth.
So if I can summarize a bit of what you were saying, like there's a lack of a nuanced understanding of the complexity of the region. And that leads to people maybe oversimplifying what their strategy should be if they want to go to a place like Pakistan, Middle East, broadly speaking. And that's a missed opportunity.
And that's a missed opportunity because if you look at it as a whole, you may not see the opportunity.
Well, what are some companies in the region that you admire the most? And you know, it could be everything from like, maybe like an old school company, it could be a new company, it could be a startup. I'm just like curious to know, like, who do you think is like a best in class example of companies that you admire, perhaps in Pakistan and more broadly speaking?
So I wouldn't say, so I wouldn't use the word admire. I'd say, uh, because it's hard to generalize like that,
Yeah,
right? Because like I said, it's so different, right? But I
yeah,
would say, if I was to think about, so if I was to think about, say, a startup type company or more mature company, I'd say Aramco is amazing. It's
hmm,
huge oil company, right? But they innovate, they're trying to change their direction.
yeah,
And watching that change is cool, right? I mean, they're looking at ways to diversify,
yeah.
and they're looking at startups, and they're looking at how to get into innovation and go beyond just what they had as oil, right? Which
Yeah.
is an exciting story for the region,
Huge
right?
priority for them. Yeah.
Huge. I think Kareem,
Yep.
I think Kareem's great, because where Uber was built for the developed market,
Yep.
Kareem was built for broken markets,
Yeah.
which is
And
why Kareem did better than
could you
Uber did in a
explain
lot of.
can you explain to people who maybe might not know what Kareem is? It's essentially ride hailing,
So
ride
Kareem
sharing.
is ride hailing, which was acquired by Uber,
Yep.
and it started out in the Middle East, from the UAE to Pakistan to Saudi, which were some of its biggest markets, and across the region until they were acquired well, I think it was 2 years ago, and then the deal was finalized some point last year. But why I admire Kareem is because, like I was saying, right, Uber was built for a developed market.
Yep.
Everyone has Google Maps, everything is great, easy, and they
Yeah.
call a cab. And then Kareem was made for a broken market where,
Yeah.
like I said, right, different levels of education exist in different countries. The Saudi demographic is different from the Pakistani demographic, is different from the Jordanian demographic. And they figured out that if they were to onboard drivers and riders, keeping in mind the local restrictions and everything else, they were able to onboard better drivers
Yeah.
with better quality that could use their system in a better way than what Uber could do, because Uber's system was much more standardized for a developed market,
Yeah.
which is why Uber saw the value in them,
Yeah.
in acquiring them, right? So I think Kareem is a super example.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of other younger examples. I think Huda Beauty was a great example
Okay.
of using social media and showing that women in our region could make it,
Yep.
and
And so,
build huge
could you explain a bit more what they do exactly?
what Huda Beauty can do.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So Huda Beauty is literally what it is, right? It's a cosmetics company, right? And it was started by a lady named Huda Katan, and she had a great social media following and started doing blogging and makeup, and it picked up from there. I mean, there's a lot of her journey was, I'm oversimplifying her journey,
Yeah.
but it ended up creating a company called Huda Beauty, which is, last valuation was over $1 billion, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. I may be wrong. But at least a few 100 million, and she
Yeah.
managed to show that upward trend and show that women from the region could do it, right?
Yeah.
And there is a market in the region for it, and
Yeah.
there's a following that you can build, right? And
Yeah.
that's cool. That's impressive, right? It shows that you can do it. I think a couple of quick names that come to mind are, Noon Academy.
Okay.
What they're doing in EdTech, I think, is really cool.
Okay.
I think what Bikeia is doing in Pakistan, with their ride hailing for motorbikes, trying to do like a Gojek model,
Yeah.
for Pakistan, with the number of motorbikes we have, and how they are one of the first who've kind of taken on a Urdu language interface for their web app, for their application. I think that's really helped their adoption, and it's doing really well. And they recently raised a really sizable round. I think those guys are doing some cool stuff. So I think generally across the region, there's a lot happening, right? I don't want to leave anybody out, but there are a lot of people doing some
Yeah.
really cool stuff. Right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that's happening on AI and data labeling, which is way more affordable than it would be in the US market, because you have that technical talent and it's really cheap. And there are people who just want to work, and they want to build, and they want to create, and they want opportunities.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of stuff in AI, in food tech. You've seen cloud kitchens in the form of Kitopi come out from the region. You've seen Swivel come out as a kind of a bus mobility company for a broken market. You've seen some e-commerce plays that have done phenomenally well in the region. I think this is, to be honest, the way I look at it is just the beginning. These are some
Yeah.
of the success stories that have come out at the start. uh, but it just goes to show how much more there is to tap
Yeah.
into,
Well, this is one of
and
the
that's
like right. This should be like one of the amazing takeaways that someone listening to this should hit home for, because there's just it's just scratching the surface right now, and like there's so much development and so much more growth that will happen in the region, that those companies you mentioned
yeah.
are like the tip of the iceberg.
No, and there's a lot of VCs, there's a lot of
Yeah.
private investors, there's a lot of founders, there's a lot of founders that are looking to move back to the region. And a lot of people reach
Yeah.
out to me, right? Because I was doing advisory for startups as well, and I continue to advise certain startups.
Yeah.
And for them, they're reaching out saying, "Hey, how do we can you help us find a
Yeah.
deal? Can you help us find a high potential startup? How can we get involved? There's a lot of opportunity. We haven't been back for 10 years. What's going on? Can you share some deal flow and opportunities with us and stuff like that? Can we mentor startups?" So it's starting, and I'm happy to help anybody, because the reality is, for me, I want to see the region grow.
Yeah.
And digitization is a way to do that. Skilling comes with that, but what it all needs is support. Now, support can come in a way of business development connections, access to market, and support in terms of investment, right? Because you need money to scale. Even if you aren't burning that money, even if you are an enterprise company that has orders to fulfill, you need to scale your teams to be able to keep up with that, right? And investment is a key part of that, or a key driver for growth. And that's what we're trying to do with the Microsoft program as well, right? I mean, it's a platform which uses Microsoft technology, and once you're on Microsoft Azure Cloud and you're kind of exploring integrations with the various tools at Microsoft as an enterprise solution, it helps you scale because it gives you access to markets through a marketplace. It helps you use the partner network in Microsoft and actually be in the Middle East, but sell in Europe and sell in the US and really accelerate that sales. And guess what? If your sales are accelerating, you're more likely to raise the capital to help you grow operationally, right? Because now you have letters of intent from companies that want to buy your solution and work with you, and that makes it easier for you to raise capital, and that brings the ecosystem up holistically. So that's what excites me, and I'm happy to help whoever wants to get involved.
Totally. I'll leave your details for sure if you want to reach out to you. I mean, because what you've been talking about is both informative and inspiring for the region. Now, the last few questions I have here are much more casual, quick fire questions. I'm going to ask you a few things like three questions that are quick fire, then one last question to end. But first, I'm going to ask you, Ali, what's the best thing you've watched recently? This could be a film, it could be a YouTube video, it could be a TED Talk, something serious, light. What's the best thing you've watched recently?
So I would be lying if I didn't say it's a Turkish show called Ertuğrul.
I've heard about this one. Is this getting pretty popular?
Well, it's
already blown up.
So I watched it a few months ago.
Okay.
My beard is an inspiration from the show. Also, I like to think. And it's really nice. It's like the best way to describe it would be, it's like a Game of Thrones.
I've heard that used before. I've heard that's been a way to describe it.
It's like a Turkish Game of Thrones, but not really. But not really. It's more about tribes than it is about empires, you know. And there are no dragons. But what I like about it is, so it's all in Turkish, so you got to read subtitles. So I watch, and it's like there's like 550 episodes. So
great!
Like 4 months. Right. But it was very addictive because, there's a lot of there are a lot of good lessons in there about loyalty, about love, loyalty, dedication, faith to your religion, to your beliefs, right from wrong, good from evil. There's a lot of good kind of topics that the show covers, and it's really well shot. Great dialogue, super fight scenes, super intense dialogues.
Historical fiction, right? It's based on
historical fiction. So it's not even historical fiction, but there must be some truth to some of the stories because it starts in a time where there wasn't much recorded history, but the characters are based off real characters, and it's kind of the start of what the Ottoman Empire became and stuff. So it's really, really interesting. But I would say that's kind of been the best thing I've watched recently, just because it was that good. from every aspect, right? The shots, the fight scenes, the music and the
Yeah.
background music, everything was very good.
I feel like now you've convinced me that I need to put this on my list, like high
Yeah,
priority
watch it.
thing to watch. Yeah.
Super good show.
Okay. Now, how about something you've read recently? A book, article, tweet storm, anything?
Um, I'm not gonna go into the tweets
Okay.
because I get loads of those, and
Okay.
to be honest, you never know which tweet is real and fake anymore when
That's
you see
true.
it on
That's true. You
WhatsApp,
can't trust
right?
anything on
So,
Twitter.
so you can't trust it
Yeah.
anymore. But I'm gonna go with your Sea Turtle article.
Oh, thank you. Now, I mean, I'd love to shamelessly promote that, but I'll let you do it. Can you please tell the audience
So
about what I wrote about?
so the Sea Turtle article for me it resonates with me, right?
Yeah.
Because uh, because I'm a sea turtle,
Yeah.
right? And I kind of, and it's all related to what we talked about at the start of this discussion, right? About how you gravitate, you're seeing you're seeing people gravitate back to their homelands,
Yeah.
or where they associate their belonging to, and actually trying to come back and innovate and create and support and help and build, right? And build is the real word.
Yeah.
And that resonated with me, right? And that speaks to sea turtles. So I don't want to ruin the article, so I don't want to talk too
Yeah.
much about it, but I think that was that was one of the best things I read recently, simply because it resonated with me a
Yeah.
lot.
Well, thank you. I swear to anybody listening, I didn't plan this. Ali organically said that, and also I have to
Seriously, pure organic.
I have to thank you for, like, I talk about my experiences in Pakistan in this article, and a big part of that is thanks to you convincing me to come over there and meet some of these people that you actually introduced me to. Okay, now the last quick fire before I go into the final question is, what is the best thing you've listened to recently? Now you could go into an intense podcast. You could just talk about your favorite song right now. Anything that you're listening to.
Okay, so this is gonna sound kind of weird,
I'm sure it
but
won't.
after many years, I bought a drum set for
Oh,
myself.
really? Okay.
I've been home for like 8 months, and
Yeah.
I
Learning a
used to
new
play the
skill.
drums, and I haven't done it, and it's been a while, and it makes me feel good, and it's a
Yeah.
great de-stressor. So I was in two minds, and I spent many months researching, and then I bought a really nice electronic drum set. Now this comes with its own pair of headphones. So for me, one of the nights, so what I do recently a lot is I listen to drumless background tracks.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay. When you practice.
Yeah, just when I'm playing.
Yeah.
So for me, that's kind of what
That's
I
a
enjoy
great
listening
answer.
to
That is a
now,
great answer.
because it helps me de-stress. I really enjoy it. I get to play along the way I want to. An hour a day, 15, 20 minutes here, 15, 20 minutes there, in between calls, I'll do it. And so, yeah, so I'm enjoying that now. I would have said something else, but right now that's the thing for me.
Okay. Now, the last question we have here, it's considering state of the world right now where there's a lot of uncertainty, a large part because of COVID, but in large part because of other things as well. What's advice you would give, both, I guess, professionally and personally, about how people can thrive in this time period?
So I would say, and this is held true for me, but this is a great time for reflection.
Yeah.
Right? It's a great time to reflect on anything and everything. So your family life, your priorities, your job. Are you enjoying your job? Is it giving you the satisfaction that you thought it would, or have you just gotten stuck into the rut and you haven't been able to take a step back and think about that?
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're not enjoying yourself, then you're just running through the motions and you're not building, creating, solving. And we want I would like every human to try and solve something, right? Whatever it is, solve something. Even if it's cleaning up the garbage outside your street, solve the problem, right? And you can't do that if you're so this is a great time to reflect. It's a great time to reevaluate your relationships, build bridges where you lost them, reconnect with people that you've lost in touch with. I think that it's from a personal and professional standpoint, I would say reflection is what I would tell people to do. It's something I've been doing. It's been helpful. I'm still doing it, but it's allowed me to do that because of this reset that we're in, right? So even though I'm more productive, and it's about headspace, right? It's all about headspace. I'm working more and I'm more engaged and I'm doing many more things than I was before. And everyone thinks, and it's the same for me, like, oh, everyone's working from home, so you're always available. Let's get on a call. And so that's there. But from a headspace perspective, it's really allowed me to kind of just sit back and be like, okay, what's how am I doing this? And what about this? And what about that? And it's just reevaluating life, where I want to be in 3 years and how I want to do things. And come up with a lot of problems to solve. You know, I've engaged a lot of startups to help. And so I would say just reflection is the key thing. And if you're not enjoying, I would say if you're professionally, if you're not enjoying what you do, it's always okay to do something else.
Yeah.
You know, and it's what I tell a lot of fresh grads have reached out to me. Can you just advise me, how do I do my CV? Do I get a job? And what I tell them is, I say, look, to be honest, you'll never get a time like COVID again,
Yeah.
where a gap on your CV will be justified by the
Yeah.
fact that there was a global pandemic. It's never going to happen, right? So
Yeah.
use that to really do something that you always wanted to do, but you thought it wouldn't amount to anything. Just do it and see how it works, because it'll make you feel good. You've always wanted to do it, you enjoy it, whatever, but you thought there was no business. I do it, because you can always add that as experience on your CV. And like I said, no one will ever get the pandemic as a fresh grad again as an opportunity to have a blank space, blank canvas on your CV, right? It just won't come again. But the world will go back to, you know, the rat race. It will. It's gonna happen. It was there before. It's gonna happen again, right? The rat race will continue. But there's like an impasse right now, and as a young professional, you can take advantage of that. If you're not married, you don't have kids, you don't have too many responsibilities except yourself, it's a great time for you. That's what I think.
Very important, very simple advice. And I think we can end with that. Thank you for your time, Ali. And
Thanks, Anthony.
thank you very
Pleasure
much for being
catching up.
here. Yeah, thanks so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'll speak to you soon.
See ya.